Welcome to Ritually Speaking. Today we are speaking about something which is going to impact every employer and employees in India, the new wage code. There is a lot of confusion about 50% wage rule, salary, structures, and compliances. And today we will be simplifying what HR and employees need to know about the new wage code. And I'm honored to welcome our guest, Mayank Francis Dias, on the Ritually Speaking. Hello, Mayank. Mayank is an employment and labor law practitioner based in Delhi and also a member of Michael Dias and Associates. He advises organizations like multinationals, PSUs, NGOs, startups, schools, airlines on various employment laws and workplace governance and compliances with a focus on India's evolving labor codes and modern workplace issues. He represents employers before labor code, industrial tribunals, and statutory authorities across India and supports organizations with compliance training, internal investigations, and prevention of sexual harassment matters. Mayank is also engaged in policy discussion on the matters of future of work and has represented Indian employers and at international forums, including programs of the International Labour Organizations. So, Mayank, welcome to Ritually Speaking. And to start with, maybe we would like to know if you can explain in simple terms what is this new wage code is all about.
Okay, so till now we've had a very complex labor law structure. Uh, the government intended to simplify the entire process. So instead of you having to look at 29 different laws and statutes, now it has all been consolidated into 4 simplified codes. And the codes obviously have their own chapters, wherein, for instance, say the Social Security Code would have a chapter on ESI, would have a chapter on Provident Fund, would have a chapter on gratuity, and the rest. So the intention is to simplify for the common man where to look. Don't get confused which law says what. Now you only have to look at the 4 codes. And it also is to bring in some sort of universalization.
Right.
Earlier, we would have a situation where each statute would have a different definition for a simple term like wage. Now you have one universal definition of wage across all 4 codes.
Wonderful. And why did the government feel the need of introducing the new wage structure?
Precisely because the earlier regime was extremely complicated. A common man would have to really wrap their head around 29 different laws to understand what their rights are. Now they can reference specifically 4 codes, and it simplifies things both for employers as well as for employees.
Okay. And is the wage code already implemented or we are still waiting?
So it's very important. We are having this discussion on the 5th of March,
Yes.
2026.
Right.
As we speak till date, only the 4 codes have been notified with effect from November 21, 2025.
Right.
As a result, all the laws that those codes subsume have been duly repealed, with the exception of the Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act that was separately subsequently repealed, I think, on the 19th of December.
Right.
But as we speak today, the 4 codes have been notified, but the rules to implement those codes have not been notified.
Okay.
So today we are in that tricky legal situation where all those provisions, the codes, which have no dependence on the rules, they have very well come into effect.
Okay.
So, for instance, the definition of wages is valid, effective, good law as we speak today, because it has nothing to do with the rules. But there are certain other provisions, for instance, say certain provisions pertaining to gratuity, or certain other provisions with regard to which form to give when. All those provisions will be covered only in the rules, and we'll get clarity once those final rules are notified. So we're in that gray area as we speak today. Legally, the codes have been notified, the rules haven't. And as a result, there was a very important press release in PIB that the Ministry of Labour and Employment put out on November 21, 2025 itself, saying that during this transition phase, wherever the new rules have to come in, there is no vacuum. We will continue to follow the old rules and regulations till the time the new ones don't come in. So there is no legal vacuum as we speak. Wherever there is a dependence on the rules, we revert back to the old rules. But other than that, the 4 codes are notified, the rules are yet to come in.
Right.
The draft rules have come in, the time for the public has already expired. So now we are awaiting, the ball is squarely in the court of the Ministry of Labour and Employment.
Okay. Wonderful. That's great, Mayank. Thanks for clarifying about the implementation days. Maybe it's depends. Rules will be here, but I believe that we are the area. We are sitting at the place where we can adopt it, and we can wait until rules or organization can start implementing it.
The ideal situation for you is to understand what the new laws are saying. And if you are in a position to start adopting and implementing it, nothing like it.
Okay.
The reality is, again, as we speak today, even the government and the labor enforcement machinery is undergoing training as to how to go about understanding what are the new provisions, what are the changes, and also understanding how to go about the prosecution in case there is any violation of any law. So we do not expect employers or organizations to be prosecuted in the present. However, it's very important for you to understand what are the financial implications, because I know for a fact that auditors are already breathing down the necks of employers, asking them to make provisions, asking them to be prepared. So that is one. So it's very important that you understand what are the financial implications, and if you are in a position, please start implementing with immediate effect, especially on counts of social security.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you, Mayank. So maybe let's deep dive into more on the concept of this new wage code. So one of the most talked about aspect is the new definition of wage. What exactly has changed in the definition?
Okay, first and foremost, let me be abundantly clear. It's a brand new definition.
Okay.
It has taken bits and pieces from various other old laws, but in essence, it's brand new.
Okay.
It is slightly complicated, I will not deny that. Everybody has been scratching their heads about how to really read the definition. In my view, the definition should be read in 3 parts.
Okay.
The first part is the inclusion part. The second part is the exclusion part. And the third part is the proviso. Okay. In the inclusion part, the law categorically states that anything and everything that is paid by an employer to the employee, and including specifically components of basic pay, dearness allowance and retaining allowance, all these 3 are included, come what may, they are meant to be wages. Thereafter, in the exclusions part, which is part 2, the legislation makes it very clear. There are 11 components that have been set out. Very straightforward components. They talk about things like statutory bonus that is paid out. They talk about things like HRA, house rent allowance. They talk about conveyance allowance. They talk about commission and overtime allowance. So they have said that these 11 components are explicitly excluded from wages. So they will not be reckoned as wages. Now, pause here before I get on to the proviso. In the old regime, there was an unfortunate practice in the industry that we would suppress the basic pay because all social security contributions were linked to basic pay. Okay. So let's assume somebody was earning 100 rupees in a month. It was quite possible that he would get, say, only 25 or 30 rupees as basic. And say another 25 or 30 rupees as HRA, and there'd be a big chunk in something known as a special allowance or an other allowance, on which we would say that, well, this is not covered for purposes of gratuity, so I'm only going to pay you gratuity on the 30 rupees or 20 rupees, whatever your basic is. So it is to address this particular issue, which was commonly known as subterfuge if you're looking at the PF law, is why the legislation added the proviso, which is the third part of the definition. In the proviso, it categorically states that while the 11 components in part 2 have been excluded, but they put together cannot be in excess of 50% of the total remuneration that is being paid. So the new definition effectively brings in two new concepts. One is this concept of what is called as all remuneration, which includes anything and everything that is paid by an employer to the employee. And based on the proviso, it goes on to say that the exclusions from wages cannot be more than 50%. So in an ideal situation, let's assume that you had a salary structure like I mentioned earlier. Let's assume 100 rupees was the monthly remuneration of an employee. He was only getting 30 rupees as basic and say another 30 as HRA and the balance 40 as a special allowance. Now that will no longer be a tenable proposition. You will have to restructure and bring your basic at least to 50 in order to be compliant with the new codes.
Right. So yeah, very clear. So which means if somebody is getting paid 100 rupees, so 50 should be at least basic
Absolutely.
plus DA plus
Absolutely. And it's important to highlight that it's at least. It's at the least. Bare minimum. It can certainly be more than that.
Yes. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Yeah. So you actually answered my next question partly, I would say. So you have already explained my next question was we often hear about the 50% basic rule. We have been hearing around this wage code and how to understand this in the practical terms. And you have already mentioned that this is what we mean. Anything you want to add more to that?
So, number one, once you understand what is wages, it's so important to understand that wherever the term wages is used in all the four codes, we are referencing to that itself.
The same.
Okay. So that era where I was looking at different laws to understand what is wages is you need to unlearn that.
Right.
In my interactions with industry, because that earlier regime is so entrenched in us, we keep thinking about, oh, I'll keep basic low. Maybe it's better for me. It's not a tenable proposition anymore.
Right.
The other issue is that the new definition of wages has several spillover effects.
True.
For instance, there's an unfortunate spillover effect with regard to maternity benefit. Maternity benefit has always been paid on full wages. That's what the old law was, that is what the new law is.
Yeah.
But now if wages in itself has a new meaning, if it's not 100 like earlier and it's only 50, so there is a different connotation. Similarly, with regard to ESI, it's a completely different situation. Earlier, ESI was on gross wages. So if there was an employee whose gross wage was in excess of 21,000, he was outside ESI. Now, we'll have to ensure that their wages, and in normal instances, wages for most people is nothing but basic pay. So now anybody whose basic pay would be less than 21,000 would be enrolled under ESI. So there'll be a lot more employees that will come within the ambit of the ESI. So there are several areas where there's a trickle down effect of the new definition of wages. That has to be understood very clearly so that we aren't in a non-compliant situation.
Right. No, that's true. When we are talking about the wage, especially for the ESIC, I understand a lot of coverage will increase because of that, and it will be a benefit to the employees in that section.
True.
Great. And many employees are thinking that the new wage code will reduce their salary. Is it really true, or is it a misunderstanding?
Okay, so that's a very common perception. It can be true for a certain set of employees, especially who are on the lower end of the pay scale. But we must understand that industry predominantly follows the CTC model.
Right.
The CTC model is an industry-made model. It is not a legal concept per se. But in the CTC model, the employer is contractually obligated to be making the payment towards the CTC of a particular employee, and that remains as is. So there is no reduction in CTC that the law is demanding of an employer, nor is it demanding an employer to make even a rupee's worth of extra payment.
Right.
So to that extent, the eventual cost remains the same and the eventual salary of an employee remains the same. However, for the employees at a position whose basic pay is less than 15,000, and due to the effect of the new definition of wages, if their basic pay has to be increased so that it's up to the threshold of 50%, their PF contribution may go up, and as a result, it may impact their take-home pay. That is one. Of course, the capping of Provident Fund contributions at rupees 15,000 still remains a viable option.
Right.
So an employee or an employer both have the option of exercising that cap at PF at 15,000, which comes to about 1,800 rupees PF contribution monthly. So you could always use that to mitigate the impact on the take home. But there could be instances, especially for the lower paid employees whose basic is less than 15,000, that they might be in a situation where the take home might take a small hit. Okay. So it means that their CTC, their total salary may not be reduced. However, the net take home may have an impact. Absolutely. Yes. With the more savings in their PF. Correct. Or other social security benefits. Correct. Great. And do you think it will, the wage code will actually impact the salary structures and CTC design? Yes, it would. Right now, the popular interpretation, and I'm using the word popular interpretation because this definition has not been judicially scrutinized by any court as yet. Right. The popular interpretation is that if you have a component in your salary structure which has not been explicitly mentioned in A to I, the 11 components of the excluded portion of the definition that we had discussed earlier, then it is part of wages. Right. So to give you an illustration, if I do have a component of special allowance or an other allowance or a hardship allowance, because they have not been explicitly called out in the excluded portions, the popular understanding of the interpretation of the definition of wages is that it is very much part of wages. So if I was to have a simple salary structure where, again, going back to 100 rupee monthly remuneration, you have, say, basic at 50 rupees, and you have HR at 25 rupees, and you have, say, another 20 rupees in something known as special allowance, other allowance, or hardship allowance, which have not been explicitly excluded, then there is a possibility that in future there would be an interpretation taken by several statutory authorities or by the courts that this is nothing but wages and you need to contribute. So effectively, your wage in that scenario would be 50 of basic plus 20 of special allowance, which is 70, and you have unnecessarily increased your burden towards gratuity. So if you want to mitigate that situation, it is advisable that you restructure your salary in such a manner that all the components that have been explicitly excluded are the ones that you have in your salary structure, whether it's a conveyance allowance you want to call it or some other allowance. That's fine till the time it's explicitly excluded. Oh, thank you for clarifying this, because I can see, I'm sure there will be a CPC design will change drastically in many of the organizations due to this impact, and specifically including the exclusions in the structure. So, and with this design, the new structure, are you seeing any increase in the PF and the gratuity also? So gratuity, certainly yes. If the earlier structure that you have has basic pay at less than 50%, then you have absolutely no option. There's no loophole. There's nothing. You will have to increase it and bring it to the threshold of 50%. And it's a bit of a double whammy, because you need to provision for it retrospectively. In other words, if you've had an employee who's been with you for the past 20 years, and historically your basic pay has only been 30% of the entire remuneration that is paid, you've only been diligently making provisions based on that 30%. Now, overnight, with effect from November 21, 2025, if any employee superannuates thereafter, they are required to be paid gratuity based on the new definition of wages. So that employee who was provisioned for only at 30% has suddenly his gratuity has shot up, and we'd be making provisions at 50%. True. No, that's true. And in fact, gratuity is paid on the current wages, so it will anyways have an impact. But yeah, of course, for the past service as well, it has to be included. Thank you, Mayank, for clarifying the concept of the new wage code. Now, I think I'll move to the section where we will be talking about the impact which will be managed by the HR and the organizations. So, from an HR perspective, what are the biggest changes organization needs to be prepared for? So there are several changes. First and foremost, the focus is on the financial implication. So we've already touched upon the provisioning for gratuity that you'll need to do. There is also a new definition of minimum wages, which requires you to ensure that your basic pay is aligned to minimum wages. So to that extent, again, you have to restructure and ensure. Effectively, when you're restructuring, you need to put two filters. First, you need to ensure that the basic pay is not less than the minimum wage prescribed in that particular state. And secondly, you need to adhere to the 50% proviso and the definition of wages. So that's number two. There are other big changes when it comes to things like leave provisions. This is the first time we have a central legislation other than the Factories Act. This is the first time we have a central legislation that applies to shops and commercial establishments and is prescribing for leaves. Up until now, leaves have been in the exclusive domain of the state legislation with regard to the Shops and Establishment Act. Now, for all workers, as per the provisions of the OSH code, there is leave that they will get at the rate of 1 annual leave for every 20 days work. So that roughly comes to about 18 days of annual leave. And then there's on-demand encashment of the annual leave available to the credit of the workers at the end of a calendar year. So again, you need to ensure that you have adequate cash flow and you have the provisions for that. So there's a lot with regard to that. There are other issues with regard to HR compliances that will get more clarity once the rules come in, whether it's the grievance redressal committee that is a new concept that has been mandated under the codes. There is also now, although not all that relevant for the development sector, but as a whole for the industry, there is now a prohibition on engagement of contract labor and core activities, which will substantially impact manufacturing and other service industry organizations. So there's a lot to unravel, and there's a lot that will be unraveled once the rules come out. I'm sure there's a lot to interpret once rules are there. Okay, so based on current scenario, what challenges do you think organizations will face during implementation? Well, one issue, as we've already discussed, is going to be on the take home and the salary restructuring. There are issues pertaining to working hours that have come about, but again, we need more clarity with the specific state rules to come in. And at this stage, I must clarify that because labor is a concurrent subject, we have the 4 labor codes, which are a central statute, but each state is well within its rights to have their own rules, and all states are drafting their own rules to interpret those provisions. So we could have a state like Karnataka where the working hours would be only 8 hours a day, but you could have Delhi which would have 9 hours a day. Although across pan India, across all states, 48 hours continues to be the universal limit of hours worked in a particular week, but the daily limit can certainly be tweaked by state. So that's another element that we are still looking to see how it works out. So that we will get a clarity once we have the rules from each state. Yes. Okay. But what is important to note is that the central code has given the flexibility to the states to tinker with it, which was much needed. Okay, that's amazing. And Mayank, so you have worked with NGOs, you have worked with corporates. So when you know that NGOs and the development organizations work with very tight budgets and fundings, and they have a lot of project-based staff, how does the wage code impact them? I think the biggest takeaway for the NGOs, for the development sector, is the fixed-term contracts. We know that a majority of the development sector thrives on fixed-term contracts because all your work is so donor-driven, so grant-driven, so project-driven. So you know that, okay, I'm getting donations for a particular project. That project is going to last me for 2 years. Now you can go ahead and provision in your budgets A, fixed-term employees, and B, their gratuity. So now you have full clarity on it, that even if a person, any fixed-term contract employee, and let's be clear, who's a fixed-term contract employee? An employee who in his appointment letter, in his employment contract, has a predetermined end date mentioned in the contract. That's a fixed-term contract employee. Any fixed-term contract employee who works for 12 continuous months or more is entitled to gratuity. So if he works for 2 years, he is entitled to gratuity worth 2 years. And that clarity will go a long way because that issue had been there forever. There had been a lot of organizations in the development sector who didn't know whether to pay gratuity or not, and there was no mandate for them to pay gratuity to fixed-term contract employees. I think now that issue has been put to bed for good. Oh, great.
Wonderful. Thanks for the clarity for the development sector. And since I come from that sector, I think this clarity will be very, very helpful. And Mayank, are there any registrations requirement under the new wage code?
So there will be a registration that you will be required to do under the OSH code. Again, much depends on the rules that will explain the modalities.
Right.
But if you already have, say, a PF code, an ESI code, you don't need to do anything. That same code continues to be active. Similarly, from an employee standpoint, they have a UAN that continues to be valid. You don't need to change anything. If you're in the contract labor segment, if you are a contractor who has a valid license, that continues to be valid till the time it's expired. But yes, once it does expire, then you will need to renew it under the new codes.
Okay. Then thank you for the clarity. And Mayank, you talked about the 48 hours of working flexibility. So are there any attendance mandatory requirement under the new wage code for employers?
There is no mandate per se, but now the law has given the flexibility of your biometrics and your electronic attendance, and there's a clear shift towards adoption of technology.
Right.
So earlier we would have those instances where the Shop and Establishment Authority or the Labor Department would say, no, I need to see the wage register, I need to see the in-out register, I need to see, say, the overtime register.
Right.
Now you can safely provide them the electronic data, and that's absolutely legally valid.
I'm sure this will be a very big relief for many organizations, especially in this era of digitization and automation.
True,
so
absolutely.
Physical registers are really
we know of several development sector organizations where there are workers out in the field, and they would remotely, electronically register their attendance through a biometric system. So now all of that is absolutely legally valid.
Wow, wonderful. That makes my life easier. Okay, so Mayank, what would small and mid-sized organizations, especially when we talk about the development sector, what can they start doing to get prepared for this new wage code implementation? Any tips from your side?
First and foremost, it's most important to understand that just because you're small or mid-size, there is no exception carved out in the law for you. Okay, so please never ever take the excuse that sir, मेरे पास तो पैसे ही नहीं है, I don't have the budget. The Supreme Court has been very, very clear. If you cannot pay minimum wages, you have no business to be in business. Okay, so till the time you are not in a position to do the basic compliances, please don't expect any mercy from any labor department or any statutory authority. That's number one. Number two is that the codes have substantially made life easier when it comes to compliance.
Right.
If you are engaging less than 10 employees, then there are next to no laws that are applicable to you. Okay, so 10 is the threshold for you, especially if you're in the development sector. So only when you hit 10 is when gratuity is applicable, when ESI is applicable. Only when you hit 20 is when PF is applicable. Only when you hit 10, maternity benefit is applicable. So all those thresholds are very much there. But when you're making that leap from 9 to 10 to 11, please be rest assured that that additional cost burden will come.
Absolutely.
The other bit for small enterprises and medium-sized organizations in the development sector specifically is the unfortunate practice of engaging consultants, or should I say engaging employees in the garb of consultants. That is a practice that is prevalent across the industry. For a majority of the situations, it is for no reason other than ignorance of law.
Okay.
What would happen in the HR department for a small NGO is that, okay, the engaging somebody as a consultant is way cheaper because I don't have to pay minimum wages, I don't have to do any social security contributions, I don't need to make any provisions for provident fund. So let's call this person a consultant, whereas in reality, that particular so-called consultant is working 8 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week, has to ask you for leave, is reporting to somebody, is under your direct control, supervision, and direction. That person, you may call him a consultant, you may give him a consultancy contract, but in reality, is very much an employee. And the codes and the authorities under the codes will apply to them. And you'll have statutory authority like the EPFO and ESI coming to your door and saying, well, you may call him whatever. They're very much employees and not consultants.
Yeah. Oh, it's a very debatable subject, Mayank, and I'm sure it needs a lot of time to discuss about it. But what I can just ask maybe one relevant question when you mentioned about the consultancy. So I understand if the person is full-time employed, especially with the 8 hours, that is falling under the ambit of employment. But what if somebody is hired for a specific tenure or some, let's say, a couple of hours a day to deliver something? Will that also fall under that?
So everything depends on what is the nature of relationship that you have with that particular person. You can always engage somebody on part-time employment.
Right.
Okay, that is very much possible under the law. If the person is truly somebody who doesn't need to work all 8 hours, and you are not binding them that no, you have to exclusively work for me. Okay, till the time that person has flexibility and has can work based on their own expectations and requirements, that's fine. That particular person would be a consultant.
Right.
But if you are engaging people as consultants to make them work as employees only because it's a cheaper route, that will not take you very far.
Very true. No, absolutely true. Thank you, Mayank. I think you have simplified the whole code in a very simple terms and easy to understand. So if I want to ask you a practical advice for an HR manager who's listening to this podcast, what are the 3 immediate steps they should take?
The first step has to be provisioning. Okay, and if your auditor hasn't said so already, you need to start doing it.
Right.
So wage restructuring, provisioning, you need to look up what are the minimum wages and ensure that your minimum wages are aligned with your basic pay. And then you need to start enrolling people under ESIC.
Right.
Because while there is no prosecution that is happening right now, the statute of limitation for you to be prosecuted is 5 years.
Right.
So I will not be surprised that in 2027, 28, 29 or 2030, they'll come back and say, well, the law was implemented from November 21, 2025.
Right.
You have been sleeping till, say, April or October of 2026. That is not a tenable proposition.
Right.
So now that you know what your new wage is like, now that you know what the basic pay of an employee is and who's coming with an ESI, please start enrolling them immediately.
Okay.
So provisioning, revision of wage structure, and ESI enrollment would be probably the top 3.
Wonderful. I think this is very amazing advice, and it will help all the HR managers to really plan for it. I understand some organizations have already adopted and some organizations in the process of adopting the new wage code. This will help them to understand better. And another question. So since you're a lawyer and it is very important to seek advice from the lawyers when you are actually talking about the law, how can HR and lawyers work together in collaboration for successful implementation of this whole new wage code in any organizations, I would say?
Okay. I think I have advice for lawyers. I see a lot of my colleagues, very often they tend to, not put themselves in the shoes of the other person. For HR, it is equally important to understand what the operations team's requirements are, what are their limitations. So it becomes very important for the operations, for HR, and for your legal counsel to come out with win-win solutions. Okay, so while the lawyer knows the law, it is important for the legal advice to be such that it can be practically implemented.
Right.
Okay, so you need to know as a lawyer what is the ground reality. A lot of the times there are risks that you have to take. Okay, so it's very important that you are taking calculated risks and you are not in your own silo that, okay, this is the law and this is what you have to follow. You need to be very clear what is the ground reality, what are the limitations of the operations team. So it's, one cannot work in isolation, and it's a cohesive team that comes out with win-win solutions. So that really has to be the mantra.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayank, for helping us understanding this wage code in such a simple and practical way. And before we log off, Mayank, I really want to ask one question. So what is that one ritual that keep you relevant?
That's a very tough question. I personally am somebody who actively avoids making habits. Because whether it's doctors or lawyers, we tend to have slightly stressful professions. um, I've always focused on the larger picture. So I never like to I never like to look at myself as a lawyer. But for me, the larger picture, what I'm doing as a human being, is more important. So for me, a ritual that I have always stuck to, or should I say, is my safe space or my pressure release point, is engaging in some sort of activity with my friends or family. So there is one badminton game that I have to play every week. Wonderful. And there's one morning jog that I have to go for every day. Wow. These two are really my rituals. They keep me sane and they are my pressure release points. When I'm playing badminton, I forget whatever else is happening in the world, and it's my guys that I'm hanging out with. So yeah, I think that is really my ritual in this crazy rat race that we're all in. Wow. Yeah. That's what an amazing mantra, I would say. And I think sports can help anybody with a real tough, I would say, day. It releases your pressure, it releases your stress also. And wish you all the very best with your mantra. And we'll see how can we adopt it. And to our listeners, the new wage code is not just a legal change, but it is going to reshape how organizations will design their salaries and benefits. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with your HR colleagues and other team members. This is Ritu. You were listening to Ritually Speaking. Thank you.